It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Security is heightened at Champions League games because of terror threats in London, Paris and Madrid as police seek to reassure the public. More than 20 years of being discredited and silenced by the Post Office, Alan Bates, campaigner and postmaster at the heart of the TV drama, gives evidence at the inquiry.
They're an atrocious organisation. They need disbanding, it needs removing, it needs building up again from the ground floor.
Also tonight, new footage shows the moments after a woman pushing a pram was stabbed to death in Bradford as police arrest a man. The Foreign Secretary is in Washington urging US politicians to approve new aid for Ukraine, the day after a surprise meeting with Donald Trump. Here, people told to get to high ground after unprecedented flooding in Sussex. And the King is to return to public duty in April and May as new royal banknotes are presented to him. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. Security measures were heightened at the Champions League games tonight after a pro-Islamic State media channel called for attacks on football stadiums. The Met Police says there's been a robust policing plan in place at the Arsenal match against Bayern Munich, adding that the UK terrorism threat level remains at substantial, meaning an attack is likely. In Spain, security was also heightened at the game between Real Madrid and Manchester City tonight and tomorrow in Paris. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris has been at the Emirates Stadium and has this report.
Around Arsenal Stadium, fans assured this was a robust policing plan to protect them. No need to change approach, the club told them. No visible sign of armed officers for this visit to Bayern Munich. That's despite the Met Police publicly acknowledging online claims that this week's Champions League matches are a terror target for the Islamic State group. Two of the quarter-final ties are in Madrid, and policing reinforcements were quickly deployed for Manchester City's match at Real Madrid. Plans also to strengthen security around Paris Saint-Germain Stadium for Wednesday's clash with Barcelona.
Nous avons vu parmi les autres une communication d'État.
We saw, among others, a communication from the Islamic State, which particularly targets stadiums. It is not new. It is obvious when it comes to an important moment like the Champions League for football. We are having a discussion with our partners.
France recently raised its security alert to the highest level after the IS claimed responsibility for the Moscow concert hall attacks that killed 144. Attacks are considered highly likely in Britain, but the terror threat remains at substantial, the third level on a 5-point scale.
There will be armed police very nearby, and that would have been thought through. There will be a plan in place for that, so that if necessary, they'll be able to get access to the location. IS don't ordinarily give information in advance about an attack, and they are well known for their no-notice attacks.
Fans at Arsenal undeterred by online threats linked to the IS.
Well, I think with the world events right now, we're going to expect a lot of this, actually. That's my guess.
I thought 100 times, should I risk it? But honestly, I think when they say they have it under control, I usually trust them.
I'm not particularly worried, no, because they threaten other places. You know, we've got people here. If I was going to do something, I wouldn't tell everyone I'm going to do it. So, yeah, not too concerned, to be honest.
The level of policing here at Arsenal looks pretty standard for a Champions League match, but it was highly unusual for the competition's organisers, UEFA, to issue a statement that referenced alleged terror threats, but they insisted all matches would go ahead this week while they remain in contact with authorities. Authorities maintaining this low-key policing at Arsenal, while security is stepped up elsewhere. Today's threat putting Europe on high alert for a summer of mega sports events, with the Euros in Germany, followed by the Paris Olympics.
Well, Rob joins us now from the Emirates Stadium in North London. 2 down, 2 to go in this busy week in the Champions League calendar, Rob, and security remaining high.
Yes, this game at Arsenal has just finished now, and It seems like everything has gone off peacefully. Fans obviously on alert given those warnings today, and really focused turning now to tomorrow night, another game in Madrid, that match in Paris. And France already on a heightened sense of alert because they've got the Olympics this summer and ambitious plans to hold an opening ceremony right the way down the Seine with athletes parading on boats. Already an ambitious plan, and that has certainly become more challenging given the security environment. We've also got the European Championships in Germany. That will see a mass influx of fans. These really the biggest sporting events in Europe since 2016, and certainly there will be enhanced measures. And what we're seeing today with the level of the warnings is showing that this move, purportedly the threat, does show how disruptive such threats can be and how authorities are having to respond.
Rob, thank you. Post office bosses were called thugs in suits when Alan Bates, the sub-postmaster at the heart of the ITV drama, gave evidence at the inquiry today. More than 900 people were convicted of theft, fraud and false accounting because of faults in the Horizon IT software. The Offences Bill is supposed to quash all of those wrong convictions. They will also be compensated. But Mr Bates described how he was silenced for more than 2 decades after he raised the alarm. Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso reports now from the Post Office inquiry.
Hello.
How much have you been looking forward to this, this day?
It's taken a while in coming, hasn't it? But we'll get there in the end.
Alan Bates has been fighting the post office for more than 20 years.
I swear by Almighty God.
A battle that took him from village halls to a starring role in a TV drama, and now to a public inquiry that wouldn't be happening without him.
As you got to meet people and realised it wasn't just yourself, and you saw the harm and injustice that had been descended upon them, it was something that you felt you had to deal with.
Ready to tell our stories.
In ITV's Mr Bates versus the Post Office, he was portrayed as stubborn, forensic and indefatigable.
War against an enemy owned by the British.
All true in person, of a man who exposed hundreds of wrongful convictions and repeated attempts to cover up the failures of the Horizon computer system. He now says his own compensation is being held up.
I'm trying to fight for everyone's financial redress in this, but I've also got to fight for my own as well. And I have no doubt that there's a bit of vindictiveness coming in from the department and post office on this. And the reason I say that is quite simple. They don't think there's any worth to any of the work that I've done over the years. They're an atrocious organisation. They need disbanding, it needs removing, it needs building up again from the ground floor.
I can't believe it.
Among those sacked on the lie that they and not the computer were at fault was Anna. She lost her Oxford post office and £80,000 repaying non-existent losses and legal fees chasing compensation.
At last, people can't ignore us, yes. We all feel that, you know. We cannot believe we've lived through this. I just cannot believe how we've gone through this in the last 20 years.
The man responsible for righting the wrongs promised finally to heed Mr Bates's words.
It was very, very compelling, the evidence that he provided today, very sobering for those of us in the post office as we stand, and we want to make sure that the culture of today's post office learns the lessons from the past. That's very, very much what I want to do.
Alan Bates has set out the case against the Post Office and the officials who, over 20 years, oversaw a system that devastated thousands of lives. Over the next 3 months, it will be the turn of those executives and politicians to come here to answer for their actions. I know.
Whatever happens next, the real-life star of this scandal leaves with his sense of humour intact.
What will you do when it's over? Me? I'm going to buy a little post office somewhere and put my feet up.
Paul Kelso, Sky News at the Post Office inquiry.
The cousin of a woman stabbed to death in Bradford has told Sky News that the victim's mother has been crying constantly since finding out that her daughter has been killed. A man has now been arrested on suspicion of murder after the attack on the woman who was with a baby. The baby was not harmed. Sky's crime correspondent Martin Brunt reports now from Bradford.
This was the scene minutes after the fatal stabbing of the young mum. In the pushchair, her baby unharmed and unaware of the tragedy, and safe in the care of police and its mother's friends. At the scene, the local MP met a shopkeeper who'd tried to save the victim, Kulsuma actor.
There's a problem across society when it comes to violence against women. It's not just a West Yorkshire issue. We know from, we're not going to try and get party political about this, because ultimately a woman has lost her life while she was pushing a baby, in a pram, in broad daylight. And that ultimately, we need services, we need more resources. But there is an issue, isn't there? There's a culture of it's okay to kill a woman, hit a woman. That is not okay.
Police say Kulsuma Akhtar was killed at 3:20 on Saturday afternoon in Westgate, Bradford city centre. 25-year-old Habiba Masoom was spotted on CCTV in the area at the time. More footage captured him getting on a bus in Market Street 10 minutes after the murder. The last sighting of Masoom, he was off the bus and walking along Leeds Old Road. Masoom was arrested in the Aylesbury area in the early hours of Tuesday morning. Police forces across the country have been on alert for the suspect. He was arrested nearly 200 miles from here. Detectives were planning to drive him back to Bradford for questioning on suspicion of murder. The investigation is far from over. Police searched a travel agency in Burnley, Lancashire, near the suspect's home. His connection with the business isn't known, but last year he wrote a review of it. As a social media influencer, he had recently posted a trip to Spain. The murder has left a community in shock and a young child with an uncertain future. Martin Brunt, Sky News, Bradford.
Lord Cameron is in the US tonight, speaking to Republicans and Democrats about the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. The Foreign Secretary met the former President Donald Trump last night, but he was snubbed by the Speaker of the House of Representatives while in Washington. Well, speaking alongside the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he confirmed that the UK will not be suspending arms exports to Israel.
As required by the UK's robust arms export control regime, I have now reviewed the most recent advice about the situation in Gaza and Israel's conduct of their military campaign. The latest assessment leaves our position on export licences unchanged. This is consistent with the advice that I and other ministers have received, and as ever, we will keep the position under review. Let me be clear, though, we continue to have grave concerns around the humanitarian access issue in Gaza, both for the period that was assessed and subsequently.
Well, to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who's in Washington, impassioned at times, James, a plea from Lord Cameron on both Gaza and Ukraine, but plenty of questions too about a certain meeting last night.
Yes, indeed, the meeting with Donald Trump that took place is also the meeting that did not take place in this building today, Anna, with Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. David Cameron has been in this building meeting various Congress people, selling his message on Ukraine. The people to whom he needs to sell it hardest are people on the Republican right who are standing in the way of this $60 billion aid package. Now, Lord Cameron, you'll remember, offended, some of them at least, likening them to Hitler appeasers. You'll remember Marjorie Taylor Greene's rebuke, "Kiss my ass," she said. Now, Mike Johnson is the man, the Mr. Fix-It, who is trying to push through Ukraine aid at the moment. It wouldn't necessarily be a good look for him to be seen right now in the company of David Cameron. We're told that there was a diary clash. He simply couldn't find the time to meet Cameron, but it seems extraordinary that the Speaker of the House of Representatives didn't have time to accommodate British Foreign Secretary, former Prime Minister. They know and revere their former British Prime Ministers. Here there's a statue of Winston Churchill just down the corridor. So it may be that David Cameron is considered, or has been considered by Mike Johnson at this stage, politically toxic, given the context that he's operating in right now with colleagues, critics and legislation he's trying to put through. Whatever David Cameron wanted from his trip to Washington, he didn't get everything he came for.
James, in the US Capitol there. Thank you. As Lord Cameron discusses the war in the Middle East, its impacts have been felt around the region. Doctors in Yemen have told Sky News that babies are fighting to survive acute hunger in a country in the midst of civil war. Houthi rebels based in Yemen have been targeting international ships which pass through the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden to protest Israel's offensive, disrupting international trade on a major scale. Rather than travelling through the Red Sea, trade vessels have been forced to travel around the Cape of Good Hope, increasing journey times by about 10 days and the distance by around 3,500 nautical miles. It has sent the price of goods rocketing, but the greatest impact is being felt in Yemen itself. From where Sky Special correspondent Alex Crawford and her team report.
Suffering doesn't hide itself in Yemen, and hunger hits the young most hard. Salah's too weak to drink anything, so the medic injects him with glucose. It's enough to revive him a little and gives him just enough energy to protest at the pain. His cries are seen as fragile progress. But it's tiny and slow, and it may not be enough to save him. Life is difficult, his mother says. They live hand to mouth, selling goods on the street. She's not well fed, and that impacts on the baby. In the next bed, there's another baby clinging to life. Like Salah next to him, Yasser too has severe acute malnutrition. In Yemen, the harsh reality is most babies, most people will go to sleep hungry each night. The two babies have been born in a country at war. That cut their survival odds. But it's the spillover from the Gaza war, which many here believe has slashed those odds even further. The Houthi attacks on maritime trade in the Red Sea has meant imports are more expensive, and Yemenis, who are almost entirely reliant on aid, have seen food prices soar. This British charity told us life has got a lot harder for those who are already suffering.
What the situation before has now been exacerbated even more. Even more people are food insecure, even more people are water insecure. And it's going to take more than, international INGOs to kind of plug the gaps of what's happening here.
9 years of civil war has already devastated Yemen and left millions living in miserable conditions for which there seems no end.
The level of poverty here is absolutely extreme. There's just shacks and bits of material, corrugated iron and wood just stacked up everywhere to make homes for these people. Their lives are extraordinarily hard, and yet they're saying now it's even harder.
Almost half of Yemen's population has no access to clean water, and the spiralling conditions here since the Gaza bombings has led to more disease. Emergency tents have been erected in Aden to cope with a fresh outbreak of cholera. The lack of money throughout the country and the deteriorating infrastructure means Yemen is at its least able to cope right now.
We have divided country first. We have these problems, inflation. We have war. We have another external war, not in Yemen only, but outside Yemen. All this effect on our life and at the same time in our health.
And that's hit babies like Salah especially hard. Every day of his 5 months has been spent trying to survive the legacy of Yemen's war. He may not have the strength in him to fight the effects of another. Alex Crawford, Sky News, Yemen.
A report out today revealed that England saw record rainfall in the 18 months up to March. Met Office data showed 111.3 millimetres of rain fell during March, 91% more than the average, increasing the risk of flooding. And it seems April is proving to be no different. If you live in West Sussex, more than 200 people evacuated due to flooding, including around 180 people rescued from a holiday park. Sky Shaman Freeman-Powell has this report.
This is what was left after Storm Pyrrhic battered West Sussex and the River Arun burst its banks. The seaside town of Littlehampton is often at risk of flooding, but nothing like this. The rescue operation began around midnight. One person showing signs of hypothermia was taken to hospital as fire and rescue teams moved in to move residents on. More than 200 people were evacuated, most of them forced to flee from Medbury Holiday Park.
The drifts, like Robinson Crusoe. Incredible.
Among them, Paul Maskell, He spent 3 hours stranded on his decking, drifting further and further away from his holiday chalet.
She was on the bed, nearly on the bed, and I see the bed lift and the bed started floating. So now I know it was time to get out. And the sofa was floating and everything was floating, everything was just floating around.
13 miles up the road, others assess what's left of their home. Heavy rain, strong winds and high tides plunged Littlehampton underwater. Residents were told to move to higher ground, but at this bungalow estate, that wasn't possible. Many people here say they simply weren't alerted as to how severe the flooding would be.
We were given warning, but it wasn't emphasised enough that it was going to be of this magnitude. All of a sudden, there was like a deluge. The deluge came over, and it was like this, and it just came through our doors, and it was a frightening experience to see this kind of height in your front living room.
Parts of the Wirral were buffeted by floodwater as fast winds met high tides. Forecasters warn that even more heavy rain and strong winds are on the way. Siobhan Freeman-Powell, Sky News in West Sussex.
The Shadow Chancellor has been laying out Labour's tax plan if it's voted in at the next election. It includes an expert panel to help it modernise HMRC. But it comes as the party's own deputy leader is being accused of tax avoidance in a newspaper investigation. Sky's political correspondent Tamara Cohen has been speaking to the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Just give me 10 minutes and I'll be back with you.
With resources under strain, how to fix the challenges in the NHS will be a key election issue.
Right, let me introduce you.
Labour's Rachel Reeves today setting out how they would find £2 billion a year to help pay for more scans, staff and appointments by cracking down on tax avoiders.
You said the NHS is on its knees, years of underfunding, chronic problems. You're not promising to kind of wipe out waiting lists. Is there going to be more coming if there is a Labour government?
The £2 billion to fund the reduction in NHS waiting lists, 2 million additional appointments a year to clear that backlog, 7.4 million on NHS waiting lists. Also 700,000 emergency dental appointments and also breakfast clubs in all primary schools. I don't think that is a drop in the ocean.
But experts say increasing the tax take is always uncertain.
No, I'm confident about our numbers for a couple of reasons. This has been tried before in the UK and it has brought in additional revenue to invest in frontline public services. And I've announced today a panel of experts led by Sir Edward Troop, the former permanent secretary at HMRC, to advise me on how we can bring in this additional money.
And what about her colleague Angela Rayner?
Do you think that she's dodged any tax?
No, and Angela Rayner has taken tax advice. And
Have you seen that advice?
No, because I haven't seen the tax returns or the tax or legal advice of any of my colleagues, and I won't treat Angela Rayner different.
To pay for their plans to support the NHS, Labour say they'll bring in £5 billion a year by the end of the Parliament by bringing in more tax people owe, closing the gap. That includes £500 million they'll need to spend on HMRC to hire more people and more technology. They also say they'll bring in more than £2 billion by closing loopholes they say the government have left for non-DOMs. But there are big questions about how far it will all go.
If the Labour government wanted to not cut all departments, it would need to find 20 billion or so. If it wanted to not cut investment, it needs to find another 20 billion or so. So 5 billion is not to be scoffed at, but in the bigger picture, it's relatively small compared to the very big public finance challenges.
Rachel Reeves has said Britain is at a crossroads, facing multiple crises. The tough spending decisions the next government will face will only come under more scrutiny. Tamara Cohen, Sky News, Manchester.
Well, we are most likely in an election year, and Sky News has been to meet a grassroots community group in Grimsby, which is renovating derelict houses and giving homes to those who need them as compassionate landlords. Grimsby and Cleethorpes are our target towns, a new constituency, and the kind of seat the Conservatives and Labour must win to have any hope of forming the next government. But campaigners say that without government help, they're taking matters into their own hands. Our national correspondent, Tom Parmenter, went to meet them.
It's an unlikely place to start a housing revolution, but that's what they're trying to do on Rutland Street in Grimsby.
This is one of the main streets that is in East Marsh. It used to be called Murder Mile. We can target this area and to build this community then we've come a long way.
With the UK in the midst of a housing crisis, Paula is on a mission. Her community group, East Marsh United, is buying up wrecks, transforming them, and then managing the homes as compassionate landlords. It started at Terry's place. Before his family moved in here, it had been left abandoned for 13 years.
They just let the houses rot. So yeah, I mean, it's bringing them back into family homes, best thing that could happen. For the mental health, it's brilliant. You're not worrying constantly. For the children, and just a sense of pride, there's somewhere you can actually be pleased to invite someone in, and it just gives you a sense of comfort, pretty much. You can move forward.
Across the street, Vicky has felt that too. She'd spent years in rundown properties where the landlords didn't seem to care.
I felt very trapped. I was quite depressed, to be honest with you. When I moved in here, it was like a fresh start. I realised I was capable of a lot more than what I was doing, and I had to get up and got a job, which I haven't done for a lot of years.
When politicians are knocking on these doors, asking for votes later this year, any promises on housing will be hard to sell.
OK, we're Grimsby and we're at the end of the road, but actually we're going to put ourselves on the map and say, do you know what? You know, you come and have a look at what we've done, because we've achieved it, and we've achieved it as a community and not because this is how you've told us to do it.
In a few years here, they've done more for themselves to sort out the housing policy on this street than any politician has in the past few decades. And so they crack on. Gary is overseeing the work on this East Marsh United's 10th house.
I think there's about 300 houses on the East Marsh that are still empty and derelict now, what no one's living in, which we could be renovating them, getting people in them within sometimes 6 to 8 weeks. 99% of the time with the government, if you wait for them, you'll be waiting forever.
The people of East Marsh want to build their own version of the future. By taking ownership of the problems, they're following their own plan, not somebody else's. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Grimsby.
The Conservative MP William Bragg has resigned the Conservative whip after admitting passing other MPs' phone numbers to a suspected scammer that he met on a dating site. Mr Bragg also stepped down last night from roles on 2 influential Commons committees and said he will leave Parliament at the next election. He previously said he feared intimate images of himself would be exposed after he was targeted in a sexting scam. The parents of the Michigan school shooter who killed 4 students in 2021 have been sentenced to at least 10 years in prison for failing to take steps that could have stopped him. James and Jennifer Crumbley were found guilty of involuntary manslaughter after the court heard a gun at their home was unsecured and they showed indifference towards their son Ethan's mental health. He's serving a life sentence. The pair are the first parents convicted in a US mass school shooting. A group of Swiss women have won a landmark case at the European Court of Human Rights, arguing that their government hasn't done enough to fight climate change. The women, whose average age is 74, said they were particularly affected by extreme heat, which is becoming more frequent. The case will set a precedent for future legal action. Now, Sky News understands that Buckingham Palace is planning for King Charles to attend more engagements by the end of April. Since announcing his cancer diagnosis in February, His Majesty has been advised by doctors not to carry out public-facing engagements. Sky's royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, has more.
He's been a bit limited when it comes to visitors recently. The Governor of the Bank of England there to deliver something special.
We have come to present you with your banknotes. Oh, right. So this, of course, is quite a big moment because we've never changed the sovereign on the banknotes because the Queen was the first sovereign to be on the banknotes.
And an interesting observation from a man who probably doesn't carry cash.
They're very elegant, these ones, I must say. A lot of trouble taking it out on the security side.
The portrait was taken from a photograph that was given to us by the royal household. It's an image that was taken in 2013, and we used the photograph to create an engraving, which is turned then into the image you see on the banknotes today.
Happy Easter, Your Majesty. Keep going strong. Keep going strong.
But there may be more change on the way after he took everyone by surprise at Easter with this walkabout. I understand that palace officials are now looking at the possibility that the king may be able to carry out engagements with larger groups of people from the end of this month. After doctors said that he couldn't carry out any public engagements, the sense that he could soon be meeting more people is bound to be seen as a positive. Although officials inside the palace, of course, will stress that forward planning is what they do day in, day out. And there will continue to be that big caveat, his health and how he's responding to treatment. Reports last week that he still wants to push ahead with his first trip as king to Australia and New Zealand later this year is one example. The palace insists that nothing has changed. They've always been looking at it as a possibility, depending on how he's doing. The mechanics of a new reign have, of course, had to keep rolling, and he's kept up with his duties behind the scenes.
It's a very good photograph, Winston. It is.
But more than anyone, he'll want to get back to what he enjoys the most, meeting people outside of these palace walls. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, at Buckingham Palace.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview tonight, joined by the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant and Conservative candidate in the upcoming general election, Alex Dean. Welcome to both of you. Among the stories, we will be discussing this on the front of the Eye, the warning from Labour that a public finance mess prevents a spending spree after the next election. Plenty more on that and the rest of the news, of course, when we come back. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the PR consultant and Conservative candidate in the upcoming general election, Alex Dean, and the journalist and broadcaster, Jenny Kleeman. Welcome to both of you, with us from now until just before midnight. To the front pages then, let us start with the Mirror. It leads with Alan Bates giving evidence at the Horizon IT Post Office inquiry, describing his decades-long war with this quote, thugs in suits running the post office. The Financial Times reports that social media giant Meta and OpenAI are on the brink of putting out advanced AI models with reasoning and planning abilities. The Eye leads with a warning from Labour. Public finance mess prevents spending spree after the next election. The Guardian highlights a new report claiming that thousands of children questioning their gender identity are being let down by the NHS. Well, the Times quotes the chairwoman of that NHS review, who says the field of medicine on this is built on shaky foundations. And meanwhile, the Daily Mail's headline on that report, at last, a voice of sanity on children and trans dogma. Meanwhile, rats infest NHS wards is the headline for the Metro, reporting that thousands of rats, cockroaches, wasps and lice were found in hospitals over the past 3 years. Princess Anne's son, Peter Phillips, is splitting up with his girlfriend, according to The Sun. A reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. But let's head to our guests then, shall we? Jenny Kleeman, Alex Dean, welcome to both of you. Jenny, 3 of the newspapers leading on this big review into trans services, effectively. And the Times, first of all, everyone's got a slightly different take, haven't they? Let's look at the Times. Their suggestion is that an entire field of medicine and enabling children to change their gender has been built on shaky foundations. So tell us about this review.
So this is the Cass review. Yeah. Dr. Hilary Cass, who was a former president of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. She was commissioned by NHS England in 2020 to look at the evidence base for how the NHS was treating children who have gender dysphoria, who feel uncomfortable in their own bodies and have gender dysphoria. And what she was looking at, Hilary Cass, was not necessarily about a person's right to transition, but about the evidence base for what is best practice in helping, and particularly children, people who haven't gone through puberty yet, who are still working out who they are. And this has been 4 years in the making. There was an interim report that came out in February 2020, which led to the Tavistock, which is the gender identity clinic where most children in England were referred to. That has been shut down. The service has been spread out to lots of different places. Also, puberty blockers are no longer being prescribed. So we kind of knew what the headlines of this report would be from that interim report, but it's coming out in full tomorrow. And it just shows that doctors were doing things like prescribing puberty blockers, which they thought would just pause puberty, that would have no sort of long-term effect. But in fact, there was not enough evidence to suggest that that was a good idea to do that. That also, doctors were not looking at things holistically. There is in the Venn diagram of children who have gender dysphoria, there are a large number of children who have other conditions, mental health conditions, or who are autistic. They weren't really looking at the sort of full circumstances. They were just looking at children who say they feel uncomfortable with their gender and then helping them to transition. And the problem with this debate, as we all know, is that it's so incredibly polarised, and that you have parents of very troubled children, or children who are, by definition, unhappy, because that's what dysphoria is, who had been told by a lot of activist charities that if the child is to go through puberty, it'll be so distressing that they are likely to feel suicidal. And so, of course, these parents are going to be pressuring the NHS to do whatever they can to stop that. Meanwhile, you have, according to all of this, an NHS that was far too willing to prescribe those drugs and make those interventions when perhaps that wasn't in the best interests of the child. There wasn't enough evidence, that's what this review says.
Yes, and that has been critical, hasn't it? At what age you give these drugs that stop the natural progression of children, and at what age a child actually realises what their gender identity should be. And as the Times puts it, the NHS review has rejected the use of these puberty blockers.
Yeah, I mean, it says what I think a lot of people would have thought from the beginning of this debate, which is it's very difficult until you have puberty to really know about your sexuality. And indeed, one of the groups that's been opposing the Tavistock-style activity within the NHS for children has been gay activists who've said, well, actually, it's very likely that many of these young people are actually gay, and you're effectively giving them treatment to change their gender and therefore avoid being homosexual. Now, the other thing I think is important about this is that Dr. Cass concludes, for most people, a medical pathway will not be the best way to manage their gender-related distress. I think most people will have thought that right from the beginning of this whole discussion. And it's worth remembering, the NHS started conducting puberty blocker and other gender-related treatments for children in 2011. We're going to have a generation of children now who later on may have claims about what will happen to them, or to put it pejoratively, what was done to them. These are children, remember, not fully informed. They're not fully able to give consent to what happens to them in the way that an adult is. What was done to them in what we've now concluded, in the best possible review, I think, by the appropriate expert, shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Well, the Daily Mail does that at last moment that you were expressing there, a voice of sanity on children and trans dogma. The Guardian, meanwhile, says thousands of children unsure of their gender identity are being let down by the NHS. You've worked on this, for about a decade now. You've been to talk to some of these people in the Tavistock. What were your conclusions as you did your own research into this?
Well, I mean, I did a report I did a long-form feature about children transitioning. It was in either 2014 or 2015, back at the time when you could actually ask questions and not be involved in a giant culture war about it. And I interviewed people from the Tavistock, and there was a range of opinions there. The one thing that I noticed was that they were all very aware that the people who came to the Tavistock, the families who came, had been on a waiting list for a long time, and during that time they had all absorbed lots of messages from the internet or from charities that had made it very clear that it would be really dangerous for their child to go through a natural puberty. And we need
dangerous
to be clear
because they might self-harm,
Yes, because they might self-harm. And as a parent, you would find that terrifying. As a child, you would find it terrifying. You'd also find it terrifying if you feel uncomfortable and then you're hearing that going through puberty is going to be a horrific thing for you. You would want to block it. And I think it's important that we're clear here that puberty blockers is different from cross-sex hormones. So it's different from taking the hormones of the opposite sex that will cause a...
So this simply halts your own adolescence,
well, at the time, they thought that it was just a neutral pause that would just allow you time to think, which is the famous phrase. But in fact, nothing is neutral. Nothing like that is neutral, because whilst all your peers are going through puberty and you're not, it's not neutral. And it's also what research there has been done shows that those who go on these blockers, very few of them end up not taking cross-sex hormones. It is a kind of pathway to transition. And it's a complex issue. It's just such a shame that having a nuanced discussion for the sake of the welfare of children is so difficult, because it is so polarised on both sides. There are people who will be gleefully receiving this report tomorrow, and there will also be some trans families that are really terrified as well, some parents of trans kids who don't know what's best for their children now.
Well, I see your point about the complexity, but on the other hand, I don't think as a matter of principle, many of us will think it's complex. Adults are free. I mean, it's a question about whether the state should do it for you, but adults are free to make all sorts of decisions about themselves and their bodies. Children, on the other hand, are in no position, I think, to make a realistic or genuine consenting process to this, and especially when the science was so uncertain. And it's actually... because of the toxicity of the debate, which the report identifies and we all acknowledge, this has been going on longer than it should have been anyway. The Tavistock alone and the trust responsible for this activity treated more than 9,000 children. I mean, it's extraordinary.
But they were totally overwhelmed. And the flip side that isn't really often discussed in all of this is that, yes, children might not be able to decide what's best for them, but the children who were being referred there were in crisis and were desperately unhappy. The point is, what the pathway that they were put on, there wasn't a proper evidence base for, and it would have potentially been catastrophic for many of them. But I feel for those families, we might say, you know, it's obvious what the right thing must be, but if you're in that situation and you have a child that's going through all of this, I imagine it's a terrifying thing to go through, and still is, because we still don't really know what the right thing to do should be.
That's a completely fair point. But what I didn't mean to pretend, and I don't think I came across as suggesting the needs of these children are anything other than complex, but the point is that saying there's a magic bullet, and the magic bullet is changing your gender by the thousand, mind you, not one or two, by the thousand, that's where we've gone so wrong as a society. And I think the natural... If you take this report to its conclusion, which is there's no good evidence for giving this...
the shaky foundation.
No good evidence for giving these transitioning drugs to children. We've failed these children that received it.
Yes. Well, the 3 bullet points, the red squares you can see for the male, pillars of gender treatment built on shaky foundations, caution should be needed before youngsters change pronouns, and evidence severely lacking over the use of puberty blockers, which is what the Times went with. Just on the middle one there, children changing their pronouns, names and clothes from a young age could lead to a greater sense of urgency for medical interventions such as puberty blockers.
This is also really interesting, because this was initially being seen as, it's a neutral thing. Just give people the pronouns that they want, let them dress however they want, without really thinking that if you are a teenager and you have made this big statement, I want to be known by different pronouns and I'm dressing differently, that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that is so difficult for you to roll back from. I mean, all of this is so sensitive and difficult. But it's also, I think we have to also roll back from the idea that this is some sort of fad as well from some sort of children, from some children. It is such a difficult thing that so many families are in. And it's good that there is some nuance now, that there has been this report that is very detailed and very thoughtful, that we can pull out the conclusions from.
There will be pages and pages and much discussion about it. There already is everywhere. Let's look at the Daily Mirror now, shall we? Mr Bates versus the thugs in suits. You know, the man at the centre of this ITV drama, Alan Bates, appearing before the Post Office inquiry, didn't intend for this to be my last 20 years, saying that from about 2009, he's been working on it for 30 to 40 hours a week and has not been employed effectively since he lost his post office in, I think it was 2003.
Yeah, and asked at the end, what are you going to do after this? He said, I just might buy myself a little post office. I mean, absolutely fantastic to be able to, after all this, to maintain even a dark sense of humour. Yes. Extremely admirable. This man has, I think, achieved a great deal for a number of people who have been wronged by our system. I know that Parliament as a whole, it's not a party political point, Parliament was trying to do the right thing by passing an act saying, basically, let's undo all of this. I'm not sure that gives the individuals the sense of justice that they want. It may be impossible to give them individually their day in court, but what he's pushing for isn't primarily about money. It's about a sense of justice and vindication, and I think they deserve that. And actually, just a blanket from Parliament's probably not going to be enough, because they were individually tried and dragged through courts, often when these systems were faulty and the people concerned with the prosecutions had a firm sense that not all was right with it.
Yeah, I know you want to come in. I haven't got time. Just a fantastic picture there on the front page of the Times of Mr Bates. I don't know if that's the moment where he was joking about the small post office, or where the photographers were asking him to remove his hat. I don't know. But anyway, you know, a very interesting day, and lots more to come, has to be said, at that post office inquiry. Plenty more next here on our press preview, including this on the front of the Financial Times. Its headline, Rwanda state airline turned down a role in Sunak asylum plan over brand fears. We will discuss that in just a moment.
And I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
It's turning everybody into, you know, a crazy, violent drug addict.
How are you feeling? I am angry. Legal abortion! It is an anti-woman agenda. 2 women say that you paid for their abortions. Are you a hypocrite, sir?
Will your candidates win?
I hope so. I think they will. I think they're great candidates.
I gotta be realistic. My sister's dead.
More than 4 weeks on, there's no murder weapon and no suspect. Are you going to catch this killer?
We are doing everything we can.
Ghislaine Maxwell has pleaded not guilty to all 6 charges against her. Mum, how are you feeling today?
Jeffrey said, you answer to Ghislaine, you just don't cross her.
We're so excited.
Severe nightmares of these people coming in and just taking me in the middle of the night.
I've watched as whole towns were torn apart by natural disaster.
I'm alive and I'm thankful for that, but there are a lot of people who aren't.
It's not the winds people fear most here, it's the water. We take you to the heart of the stories which shape our world. Do you truly believe what you're saying?
A lot of cases that I know are reported from Ukrainian missiles themselves.
Ambassador, with respect, I think that's preposterous.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview, joined once again by the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant and now Conservative candidate in the upcoming general election, Alex Dean, the man who has the longest title that I read out, I think. Anyway, let's go to the Financial Times, shall we? Rwanda, presumably coming back next week in Parliament. We certainly had a meeting today between Mr Sunak and the Rwandan president, did we not, in Downing Street? And here is a story about Rwanda's state-owned airline turned down a role in the asylum plan because of brand fears.
Yeah, so Rwanda Air, which I think is quite a cleverly named airline, is getting lots of free publicity this week for not doing something. And what they've done is say they're not going to take part in the flights. The irony here is, as you've pointed out in your introduction, they are completely owned by the Rwandan government. I mean, it must be quite annoying. I mean, it's fine. British Airways now does what it wants to this in the private sector. But for your own airline not to follow through on government policy, which Rwanda continues to say it's proud of and wants to have, it is a bit of a slap in the face. And so the government's going to be left thinking, how are we going to get people to Rwanda? Because, of course, this is not the only airline to say they won't do it.
Yes, well, how are they going to get people to Rwanda and where are people going to stay? Because the front of today's Times was about the places where Suella Braverman was posing outside of, being sold off. It's a kind of nightmare. The clock is ticking on Rishi Sunak's self-imposed deadline of saying that there's going to be flights to Rwanda this spring. When this spring? When is the latest that you can say spring is? There's going to be ping-pong, House of Lords, House of Commons to get it through. Who's going to fly them? Where are they going to stay? I mean, I personally feel that this entire strategy has been a gimmick from start to finish, an incredible waste of money, and increasingly looks unworkable.
Well, it's a deterrent, isn't it? If that's your title for a
gimmick,
gimmick,
but
that is the point of it.
Do you mean you think it's gimmick because the government... I'm just trying to... Do you think because the government prefers to have the argument than to actually have the policy? You think it's a helpful political device?
I think it is a good way of saying we're doing something. Here is a country where we're going to put them, rather than saying, you know what, we're going to clear the backlog and process these things and send people as soon as they arrive. We'll send them and we'll cooperate with our...
Even if you get a few flights going, people who come to the... And it'll be very eye-catching as a policy. Let's agree whether people are for it or against it, that those who are running people smuggling rings might well be asked by their potential customers...
OK, all right, well...
Might I wind up in Rwanda?
OK, two quick stories. I'm going to read one out loud. I haven't got time to talk about it. The Guardian, ministers announce a shoplifting crackdown. This has caused real concern, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Waves of shoplifting. And also causing concern, presumably, is the Metro. Rats infest NHS wards and other creatures, to be fair, as well.
Yes, disgusting. Lice in children's wards, maternity units, maintenance backlog to repair rundown buildings has hit £11.6 billion. So if we didn't have enough to worry about in the NHS, they're being overrun with pestilence.
Oh, nice. Thank you. Jenny Kleeman and Alex Dean. Thank you both very much indeed. To see you for the 11 as well. Plenty more to discuss. Right now, here's the weather. Well, the rest of the week will stay unsettled with spells of wind and rain. Southern parts look drier for the weekend, though. Ireland, Northern Ireland, along with Devon, Cornwall, Pembrokeshire, will have a wet and blustery start to Wednesday. The rest of Britain will be mostly fine, if chilly, with a grass frost in places. Early sunshine over Britain will be replaced by low cloud and rain from the west through the morning, but the southeast should stay dry. Meanwhile, Ireland and Northern Ireland will see rain clearing to leave drizzly outbreaks by lunchtime. Milder than today, but not quite as windy. Well, Sky News at 11 is next. Our press preview continues. Security heightened at Champions League games because of terror threats in London, Paris and Madrid as police seek to reassure the public. Full look at the papers too, coming up for you next here on Sky News.